Chase Young headlines my list of Wave 1 NFL free agency losers for the Washington Commanders. I'm going to tell you why and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. Please subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you always get the latest episodes when they drop. I'm David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Commanders for Commander Country, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. You can find me there, here, or on Twitter at dharrison82. And I want to thank you for making this show your first listen or your first view of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on your app store. Our listeners get a 100% free boost on their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On, all caps, all one word, inside the game store. How likely are the Washington Commanders to land on HBO's Hard Knocks this season? That's a question we're going to dive into, but first we have to have the downside follow-up conversation to yesterday's Wave 1 NFL free agency winners episode, and that means losers are up today. If you do not see the winners episode, please go back and check that out. We identified a couple of winners plus 6 total honorable mentions. Washington Commanders winning all over the place this offseason. Of course, we'll see how that translates into the regular season, then hopefully the postseason. But today we do have to talk about the downside of that, and that is the losers. Because as I mentioned in the cold open on this episode, Chase Young is my primary loser to this Wave 1 of NFL free agency, the beginning of the new league year. And it started in the offseason portion, still slightly before legal tampering began. Daron Payne's contract extension with the Washington Commanders, one of the guys I mentioned yesterday as a winner, clearly getting that bag. His re-signing actually leads to Chase Young eventually or essentially becoming a loser in this whole deal, because the Washington Commanders now, with that Daron Payne extension, are top in the National Football League, spending $65.7 million of their current cap space on the defensive line this season. Here's how that breaks down. Defensive tackle John Allen accounting for $21.44 million of salary cap space this year. Montez Sweat, the defensive end, $11.5 million. Also, he's in a contract year. Chase Young accounts for $10.99 million of that salary cap space. Also in a contract year, if the Washington Commanders don't pick up his fifth-year option. That's where this conversation is going to lead to. Daron Payne accounts for just $10.01 million of that cap space after his contract, because that first year of his contract only accounts for that much of this year's salary cap. Now, that being said, next season, without Montez Sweat or Chase Young under contract or on the fifth-year option, Washington is still set to pay out $49.6 million against their salary cap for their defensive line next season. That is 4th highest in the league currently, behind only the San Francisco 49ers, Cleveland Browns, and the Las Vegas Raiders. Those are the only 3 NFL teams currently scheduled to pay more of their cap space towards the defensive line than the Washington Commanders. And that's before either Montez Sweat or Chase Young receive extensions, or Chase Young receives the 5th-year option. So already paying a lot of money. Re-signing Montez Sweat, according to current projections on SpotTrack.com, projected to pay out $16.6 million per year on average on a new deal. That ups that $49.6 million number to approximately $66 million, which would then be $12 million more than the currently projected highest cap hit team, the San Francisco 49ers, paying for their defensive line. So re-signing, bringing back just one of these guys, puts Washington back in the top spot again next season as far as cap hit, cap dedication to their defensive line. You bring back both of them, that's even more problematic. Chase Young's 5th-year option is $17.45 million. That's what his contract would be next year, putting Washington even higher up on that list, $67.1 million against the cap. Again, compared to the 49ers, $54.5. That's $13 million almost more than the next highest team dedicating their cap space to the defensive line. And that's just if you're bringing back one of these guys. And if you use the 5th-year option on Chase Young, your cap dedication to the defensive line is actually higher, and that's fully guaranteed. So there's no way to negotiate around that and flex that in any way, shape, or form. Whereas a new contract with Montez Sweat, you can actually try to lower that cap hit the way they did with Daron Payne this year. So let's say you sign a new deal with Montez Sweat, make his cap hit just $10 million. Now you're upping that number to $59 million. You're still the number one team, but now you're the number one team by $5 million instead of $12 million. There's a very big difference there. And you have Chase Young in a contract year if you pick up his fifth-year option next season, while Montez Sweat would ideally be on obviously an extension. So you're going to have him longer. So keeping either Young or Sweat puts you back in the top as far as how you're spending your salary cap on your defensive line. But re-signing Sweat does so with more years to come after 2024 and the option and ability to maybe flex some money if you need to moving into the future. While picking up Young's fifth-year option guarantees you nothing beyond 2024 and gives you zero cap flexibility. By the way, if you take it out past 2024 and you go into 2025, the Commanders are currently second overall in 2025 with $54.1 million committed to the salary cap and again to the defensive line in their salary cap already in 2025. That's $54.1 million. Guys, next year's biggest cap chunk to a defensive line in the NFL, $54.5 million to the 49ers. 2 years from now, the Washington Commanders fall just $400,000 shy of next year's number one team so far. The amount of money they have tied up in the defensive line is insane. It's not prejudicial. It's not going to completely tank the team or anything, but it's a lot of money already dedicated. And that $54.1 million that's already dedicated for 2025 only pays for 4 players. And all 4 of those players are defensive tackles. None of them are defensive ends. John Allen, Daron Payne, Fedarian Mathis, John Ridgway. Those are your 4 players you have under contract on the defensive line through 2025 right now, and they already account for $54.1 million. And again, 2025, if you go the Chase Young fifth-year option route, Montez Sweat walks, Chase Young potentially, depending on what happens, could eventually walk. 2025, you could be entering that offseason with $54 million dedicated to your defensive line against your cap and no defensive ends, no starting defensive ends under contract. Again, there are ways to manipulate the cap, so I'm not trying to deliver you a doomsday pill here. It's just to illustrate kind of the situation for the finances on the defensive line already and why this is going to impact, I think, Chase Young negatively, considering that Montez Sweat has played 16 or more games in 3 of his 4 NFL seasons, has had 7 or more sacks in 3 of those seasons, as well as on pace to have at least 8 in 3 of those 4 seasons before familial duties pulled him away for the majority or for part of 2021. There were some other issues as well, but for the most part, it was familial duties. Not going to dredge up his past right now either. But I don't see how you don't re-sign him in favor of picking up Chase Young's fifth-year option, considering that Young has played in just 12 games in the last 2 years, hasn't recorded 8 sacks in a single season in his career. And doing both, you put your defensive line cap hit near $80 million potentially, which that I do think would be debilitating for the team. I don't think you can put $80 million on just your defensive line. So if you got to pick between the one, Montez Sweat or Chase Young, I think Chase Young is the loser in this deal, which makes him our biggest loser from free agency because that Daron Payne contract essentially catapults the Washington Commanders towards this crossroads, I think. But he's not the only one. There is another Washington Commanders loser from the first wave of NFL free agency, and this one's going to be a little bit more of a sensitive subject. It's going to hurt a little bit more, but that is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers, you get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything and anything you want, from the money line to point scores to threes drained, rebounds in a specific game, whatever you want. The Sweet 16 teams are taking the floor on Thursday and Friday for a spot in the Elite 8 of the NCAA men's tournament. And right now, Creighton is the most likely to win their matchup, favored by 9.5 points over Princeton, while the 7th seed Michigan State Spartans are the least favored, still favored by 1.5 points over the 3rd seed Kansas State Wildcats, but that 1.5 point spread is the closest of all the Sweet 16 matchups as of the time of this recording. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a bigger chance at bigger payouts with same-game parlays. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the National Football League. Thanks again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen or your first view of the day. The second loser from the first wave of NFL free agency is unfortunately safety Kamren Curl. Now, before we get into this conversation, guys, I want everybody to understand, I value Kamren Curl as a safety on this defense just as much as I'm assuming that most of you do. Most of the fans I see on social media, you love Cam Curl. I love Cam Curl. I think he's a great part of this team. Definitely don't want to see him leave. The conversations being had about Cam Curl is the extension, paying him, how much to pay him, and when to pay him, whether that's this offseason, during the season, training camp. Is there going to be a holdout situation? A lot of things kind of happening here with safety Kamren Curl. No solid reports, just a lot of kind of wanting to see Cam Curl get his contract. I would love to see Cam Curl get his contract. The reason I'm saying that Cam Curl is a loser in this wave of free agency is not really because of anything that Washington has done per se, although, again, spending so much on the defensive line kind of makes you have to look for corners to cut elsewhere to kind of save a little bit of money as well. But more so, this has to do with just the NFL landscape of safeties and the fact that from what I'm seeing, safeties are just not getting paid very well these days in NFL free agency. Cam Curl, currently nearing 24 years old, entering the final year of his rookie deal, and will earn just over $3 million this year, thanks to the NFL's proven performance escalator, which raised his 7th-round rookie contract salary to that $2.9 or so million after bonuses and everything, takes it just over $3 million because of the play of his first 3 years, because he's been incredibly valuable to the Washington Commanders. So that's good. Now, here's the bad news. Again, kind of tied to the Daron Payne extension, because Washington, if you keep Montez Sweat or Chase Young, again, my opinion is that you keep Montez Sweat because of the track record and Chase Young, and you know, some of that's not his fault, injuries and all that stuff, but just it kind of is what it is. You're going to need to find a way to save money. That means making hard decisions on who you pay and choosing to pay the right people. Now, at the end of the day, Cam Curl, a lot of this kind of depends on what Cam Curl wants, right? So if Cam Curl wants top 5 safety money in the NFL, then you're talking $16 million a year on average. That's going to be a tough pill to swallow if you're already paying $65 million plus on just your defensive line. If Cam Curl wants top 10 money, then you're still talking $14 million a year on average. Okay. And again, the cap numbers can be spread, right? But that's a lot of cheese, even on average. And $14 million per average on average, that money's still, like, Daron Payne's only getting $10 million this year. But again, you go to 2025, they're already in the whole $52 million against the cap with only 4 players signed. That's because, in part, Daron Payne's cap hit gets much, much bigger a couple years into this contract. So depending on what Cam Curl wants, if he wants top 5 money, top 10 money, that might complicate things between he and the Washington Commanders. Adding either of that amount to the current cap figures that the Washington Commanders have dedicated to their defensive back room would put them in the top 5 or top 10. So you're talking about being the number 1 team in cap space dedicated to your defensive line, and potentially being top 5 or top 10 in cap space dedicated to your defensive back group, just by paying Cam Curl top 5 or top 10 safety money. Unlike the defensive line, though, you don't have another top shelf player in your defensive back group. I love Derek Forrest and where he's going. Potentially could get there. Benjamin St. Juste I like a lot. Kendall Fuller is a solid player, although I think we've kind of seen probably his ceiling. On the defensive line, though, again, you're top in the NFL in cap space dedicated, but you've got Montez Sweat, who's a very solid player, above average, top half of the league in the defensive end group, I think. And you've got 2 of the best defense tackles in the game today. So it's a little bit easier to swallow that top 5 money for the defensive line when you're getting that play. A little bit harder in the defensive back room, being top 5, top 10 in money dedicated to that group when you're only getting 1 player who's kind of at the top echelon at that group. So not only that, but then you look at the National Football League trends and the way that safety contracts are starting to move. Only 1 safety signed this offseason, wave 1 of NFL free agency, got an average annual value better than 20th in the National Football League. So we're talking top 10, top 5 money for Cam Curl. Only 1 guy so far this offseason has gotten top 20 or better than top 20 money, rather, top 19 or better money in the NFL. And that's Jesse Bates, who is now the 4th highest annual average value contract, $16.005 million on average among safeties. But he had to play his 5th year in the league on a franchise tag just to get that money, and he had to leave the team that drafted him. Comparing Bates to Curl at the end of each player's 3rd season, so Curl going into his 4th, Jesse Bates coming out of his fourth and coming out of his fifth even. So again, Curl's stats are a couple years behind Bates at this moment in time. But at the end of each player's third season, Cam Curl played 44 games compared to Bates' 48, started 37 compared to Bates' 48, had 3 interceptions compared to Bates' 9, 9 pass breakups compared to Bates' 31. The fumbles were different. Cam Curl has more sacks. Jesse Bates, actually, I was surprised to find out, has no sacks to his career, according to ProFootballReference.com, while Cam Curl has 4. Cam Curl has 12 tackles for loss. Jesse Bates had 2. And then tackles, Cam Curl 270 total, Bates 320. So in 3 or 4 of the top 5 or 6 categories that a safety produces in, Jesse Bates through 3 seasons is outpacing Cam Curl by a fairly significant amount in some of these things. I mean, interceptions 9-3 is pretty significant. Now, the second highest annual average value contract signed so far in 2023's free agency period at the time of this recording, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, former Saints and former Eagles safety, now signed with the Detroit Lions on an $8 million deal. That's 20th in annual average value, and it's only a 1-year deal. So again, he had to leave the team he was playing for, and that $8 million is still only 20th in the NFL. A far cry from top 10 or even top 5 money. And that 50% decrease between the top safety contract and the second highest this offseason is big, and that's kind of what I'm talking about as far as why Cam Curl is a loser here. Again, not really so much what Washington is doing or how we look at Cam Curl, just kind of how the NFL landscape is paying or not paying safeties, as it were saying. Now, the top safety re-signed this offseason, right? So the top safety to get a new deal with the team he played for at least last year was Donovan Wilson from the Dallas Cowboys. His deal, 3 years, $7 million average annual value, but only less than $5 million of that really is guaranteed on average. So he's at 3 years, $21 million annual or $21 million contract, but only not even 15 million of that is actually guaranteed money. So if you compare Wilson and Curl from 2020 to 2022, the last 3 seasons, Curl played 44 games. Wilson's been in 40. Curl started 37. Wilson started 30. Both of them have 3 interceptions. Pass breakups, Cam Curl has 9. Wilson has 6. Sacks, Cam Curl has 4. Wilson has 8.5. So there's a pretty big disparity. Their tackles for loss, Cam Curl has 3 more rather than Wilson. And then tackles, Cam Curl has 69 more. So you see here, you've got about 2 or 3 categories where Cam Curl outpaces Wilson, but then you've got another 2 or 3 that Wilson outpaces Curl, and then they're tied in interception. So a little bit more of a realistic balance between the 2 players. But again, Wilson just got $7 million on average, less than $5 million in guarantees. That's a long, long way away from top 10, top 5 money. But I think a lot of Commanders fans think that Cam Curl might want and deserves that type of money. But you look at kind of the statistical production value, and again, stats only tell so much of the story. Cam Curl potentially, I don't cover the Cowboys. I'm not familiar with Donovan Wilson, so I don't know what Cowboys fans would say, but Cam Curl obviously means a lot to this Commanders defense, and we can all agree that when you see Cam Curl on the field, he provides a huge, huge benefit to the team. So who does Curl match up with statistically over the past 3 seasons the best? I went through, I sorted all the stats of the safeties who have been playing for the last 3 seasons, and the best that I can come up with most currently is Jordan Poyer. Jordan Poyer has played in the exact same amount of games in the last 3 years as Cam Curl. Cam Curl started 37 of those games. Jordan Poyer started 44, so he started 7 more. Cam Curl has 3 interceptions to Jordan Poyer's 11, so that's an 8 interception difference. That's pretty big. Pass breakups, 9 to 22. Cam Curl has 9, Jordan Poyer has 22, so that's a pretty big difference. But the rest of the stat categories, sacks, there's only a 1 sack difference. Tackles for loss, there's a 4 tackle for loss difference. And total tackles, there's a 10 tackle difference. So Jordan Poyer and Kamren Curl, to me, kind of the most similar type of players statistically for the last 3 years in producing for their team. And Jordan Poyer is a leader on the team, Cam Curl, so I think that kind of fits a little bit. Jordan Poyer, though, currently is making $6.25 million annual average value. That's 27th in the league. But Poyer is also older. Poyer is nearing 32 years old. Curl's turning 24 this year. So if a 24-year-old is playing at that Jordan Poyer level, then you would assume that he's going to get more money because he's younger and potentially has more ceiling to grab. But the question is, how much more does he get when the market clearly doesn't support paying safeties as much as it does other positions? Realistically, if you're Cam Curl, if you're aiming for top 10 money in safeties, $14 million per year, that's going to be tough. And the franchise tag is estimated to be $19 million next year. So Would you want to take the $14 million when you could potentially get $19 million on the franchise tag? Would Washington even franchise tag you at that type of a number? But the bottom line is, guys, the NFL is just not paying safeties, and that's evident by even that $19 million franchise tag number is actually the fourth lowest in the National Football League, behind running backs, or it's just above running backs, tight ends, and specialists. So those are the only three position groups: specialists, kickers, punters, long snappers, tight ends, and running backs are the only three positions who are projected to have a lower franchise tag hit than defensive back, safeties next year. So that just kind of shows you, again, the safeties. It's not about me not appreciating Kamren Curl. Just want to make that clear. It's not about fans not loving Kamren Curl. And again, Kamren Curl obviously makes this defense better, but the way that the league is paying or not paying safeties could influence what the Washington Commanders decide to do with Kamren Curl, and that can influence what Kamren Curl decides to do. Hope he gets his money. Hope he gets paid what he's looking for. I don't know what he's looking for. Top 10, top 5, top 20, whatever he's looking for. I hope he gets it. I hope he sticks around Washington for a long, long time, because I think he and Derek Forrest could be a really good pair. But again, just looking at the landscape of the league, I do think that guys like Kamren Curl, those safeties who are looking for paychecks, could be hindered a little bit by what the league is doing with some of their position mates across the league. Coming up next, do you want the Washington Commanders on Hard Knocks, who their competition is, and why Washington might be the most entertaining of them all? That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever thought you'd make a good GM, you've got to give this game a try. And be forewarned, it's not as easy as you think to create a dynasty. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of the team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory. And the best part is, you get to do it your way. You want a vertical offense, you want a run-first offense, you want 3-4, 4-3, whatever it is, hire your coach to run the system that you want, and then build your roster around it to be successful from there. All you have to do is enjoy this fun, engaging, updated, regularly game Ultimate Football GM. Whether you've got Wi-Fi, data signal, or you're on airplane mode, you can play the game. So it doesn't matter where you are, you'll be able to play this game. And make sure you use a free 100% boost on the game, because you get a free 100% boost to your franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps in the game store. So make sure you check it out today. To download this, just go to ultimate-gm.com or look it up on your app store. It's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Where do the Washington Commanders rank among teams that are eligible to be forced onto HBO's Hard Knocks? That's the discussion here as we wrap up today's episode. NFL.com's Brendan Walker, fellow Sun Devil, Arizona State alum, recently wrote about HBO's Hard Knocks candidates for NFL.com. And to outline the candidate pool real quick, in case you're not familiar, any team in the National Football League can actually volunteer to be on Hard Knocks. So that the Los Angeles Rams actually did it back when they moved to LA, but I think they're the only team that's ever done it, and it's kind of weird. I don't know why any team would do it, but the NFL also has a forcing mechanism. They can force any team to be on Hard Knocks as long as they don't meet one of these disqualifying criteria. First, if you have a first-year head coach, your team cannot be forced to be on Hard Knocks. Again, you can volunteer, but if you have a first-year head coach, your team cannot be forced onto the program. Second, if you've secured a playoff berth in the last 2 seasons, you cannot be forced to do Hard Knocks. Third, if you've appeared on Hard Knocks in the last 10 years, you cannot be forced to go on Hard Knocks. So when you take those disqualifiers away, there's only 4 teams left. Washington is one of them. They don't have a first-year head coach. They haven't had a playoff berth in the last 2 seasons, and they haven't been on Hard Knocks in the last 10 years. So they're clearly on the list. But there are 3 other teams that are also on that list that could be forced to be on the show if somebody doesn't volunteer. Again, very unlikely that a team volunteers. In alphabetical order, those 4 teams, including the Commanders, are the Chicago Bears, the Washington Commanders, the New York Jets, and the New Orleans Saints. So those are your 4 teams that the NFL can essentially say, boom, you're going on Hard Knocks. Welcome, HBO. Good luck. Have a good season. I don't know. So let's look at the biggest storylines from each of these teams. I'll give you where Brendan ranked each of them. Again, I'm going to go in alphabetical order here. The Bears' big storyline, Justin Fields obviously is going to be a draw there. Premier rookie heavy cast after getting extra draft capital. They're going to have some good premier picks in the NFL draft, so they're going to have some good rookies for HBO to be able to cover there. Solid free agency class. that does a little bit for me, but it doesn't do a whole lot because typically they like to look for the underdog player. They kind of look for the maybe lesser known type of player, and especially some rookies. So that rookie class having some premier picks in this year's draft could be a draw, but the free agents, while they're good and while they're entertaining, not sure that's a huge draw. And then, of course, Justin Fields, young quarterback. Is he going to be the franchise leader? Is he not going to be the franchise leader? That's always a good draw. So those are the bigs. The Bears' big storylines. Brendan has them ranked second overall out of these four teams as most likely to get put on HBO's Hard Knocks. For the Commanders' big storylines, obviously the new ownership expectation and potentially a big mover. Magic Johnson may be involved. Jay-Z may be involved. So maybe you get those guys. Well, one of those guys if their groups win the bidding as a cameo, right? I mean, imagine getting Jay-Z and Beyonce on Hard Knocks. Who wouldn't want that if you're working at HBO? But Magic Johnson, also a very popular draw as well. And then, of course, you have the quarterback competition. Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett, young quarterback, veteran quarterback. All those things. You have Eric Bieniemy and the storyline surrounding him. And, of course, plenty of young talent. Jahan Dotson can be out there, Brian Robinson Jr., Antonio Gibson. Curtis Samuel is a crack up when he decides to show it. So plenty of young talent there. And look, Chase Young is still around. He enjoys some camera time as well. Brendan has them ranked. The Commanders ranked fourth out of these four teams is likely to get HBO's Hard Knocks. The Jets' big storylines, Aaron Rodgers, Robert Saleh, the head coach, makes for good TV as well. He's got a good personality. Sexy second-year players in Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. And then, of course, they saw some draft capital. Brendan has the Jets ranked number one out of these four teams. And then finally you have the Saints. Their biggest storyline, Derek Carr. I don't really know what else. Like Derek Carr, I guess, is their big storyline. The city of New Orleans is great, you know what I mean? But Derek Carr really is kind of the biggest. Brendan has them ranked third. Obviously, I don't have the Saints ranked third or first. I've got them ranked last. So here's my rankings personally. Number one, I do have the Jets, just like Brendan did, even though I'm really over this Aaron Rodgers stuff. I'm really just I don't know, man. Like just do the trade. And I know he only has control of some of it. Like he can't force the Packers and Jets to agree on a trade, but like I'm over it. You know what I mean? So I actually think that might hurt them a little bit because the NFL kind of knows that there's people out there who are really kind of sick of Aaron Rodgers and may not want to tune in for it. More on that here in just a minute. Second, I've actually got the Commanders. I think putting the Washington Commanders on HBO's Hard Knocks could be a low-key jab at Dan Snyder from the National Football League, putting that franchise that he's just been exiled from on the main stage on HBO's Hard Knocks, the most popular football drama of the offseason. I mean, that's a little bit of a kick in the pants on the way out because they're going to make a lot of money. They're going to get a lot of attention. Fans are going to show up. There's going to be a lot of excitement. So again, there's all the storylines involved, the quarterback battle and EB and all that stuff, but also kind of a low-key way of setting one last jab at Dan Snyder on the way out the door. Then you got the Chicago Bears that I have ranked third. Young quarterback, draft prospects coming in. Plus, it's Chicago. And I think you have an over-under of 20 Bears and Mike Ditka references during the HBO season. The Saints, again, kind of boring. It's an exciting city, but Derek Carr's redemption story, I'm not sure is that big of a pull. My prediction, I think the Jets get. I think it could be the Commanders or the Jets, but I do think the Jets get. The NFL loves drama, and honestly, I will even though I'm sick of Aaron Rodgers, I'll still tune in. If anything, just so that when Aaron Rodgers says one of the crazy things that he likes to say, I can scoff at him and tell him that it's hooey or whatever. Also, the Jets out of those four teams, probably most likely to make the playoffs this coming season. They were very close to making the playoffs last year. Now they have Aaron Rodgers, so probably most likely to make the playoffs, which means in 2024 they'll be off the list. Meanwhile, the Commanders, Bears, and Saints arguably could all be expected to be on this list again. Although with the Commanders' new ownership, you never know, they might have a new head coach depending on which way they decide to go, especially if they don't make the playoffs. So they could be off the list as well. But that's kind of my list, my predictions. Let me know what your list is, your power rankings, which team you think will be on, which team you think you want to see on, because they might be different, upcoming on HBO's Hard Knocks. That decision will be coming down the pike relatively soon. So appreciate you for participating in that conversation. Appreciate you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view of the day. For your second, check out Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino break it all down Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Come back tomorrow. I'm going to be diving deeper into what the Washington Commanders could do if they don't pick up Chase Young's fifth-year option like I predict, and more. So if you want to join in on that conversation, this conversation, drop your comments into the comment section on YouTube or hit me up via email at lockedoncommanders@gmail.com or in the Twitter DMs on at dharrison82. I'm signing off for today. I'm David Harrison, staff writer for Commander Country Sports Illustrated's FanNation, your host here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you next time right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.